Hi, and welcome to today's Monday Musings. You've got the real me talking to the heart of the real you. I just came in from exercising not long ago, and while these thoughts were fresh on my mind, I wanted to share them with you. So I didn't take time to freshen up. Doesn't matter. I want to talk about another area of toxic relationships that I haven't addressed yet, and that is that which can occur in the family itself. Remember, a roller coaster relationship is one where you seem to go along and then you hit some kind of high point or bump in the road that causes a crisis. The crisis is not handled in an appropriate manner, usually with violence of some sort, either verbal violence or domestic violence. And then once the violence is spilled, then you spiral down into a lull. It's not really a healing point or place, it's just a low. It's kind of the sigh after the peak. Same as, you're running a race and you get to the finish line and you have the rush of the finish line, and then you just have the collapse after all the energy that has been expended. So this is the same kind of roller coaster dynamic, and it can occur in a family. We know of families who one of the family members might have an addiction, and this behavior pattern, they'll be rocking along, you think they've conquered their addiction, then a crisis hits, they can't handle it, they go back to their addiction, that creates another crisis, and the whole family is thrown out of whack. I know of many people who have confided in me of some of the dynamics in their own families that have occurred. The marriage is good, but there's a challenge with one of the children. Sometimes it's the challenge of a physically handicapped child. But in other cases, in this one in particular, it's the challenge of an emotionally handicapped child. I say that because they have mental health issues that have prevented them from maturing emotionally. And so in this one particular family that I know, the child was actually diagnosed with this mental health issue, and they would have outbursts of anger. And things would seem to be going along peacefully, and then something would happen to trigger the child, and the outburst of anger could be, a lot of times were actually accompanied by violence. Well, the parents are the ones who learned to adapt, and what they did, they sought, medical and psychological assistance, but basically the best way that they found to adapt was to, what I would call, walk on eggshells, but they called it avoiding a conflict. And they would do whatever they could to keep from confronting this child. Therefore, things that would be issues of normal discipline, like keeping your room clean, would be handled without the normal repercussions that you might use with a child, like you can't come out of your room till it's clean. Because for them, the room could be torn up worse because of the child's outburst of anger. So consequently, the parents learned and were conditioned to respond to the roller coaster ride in the best way they knew how. And as an adult, this child still behaves the same way. They're extremely self-centered, they're extremely selfish, and they haven't learned very well how to conform to other people in their lives. And they continue this roller coaster cycle with their parents. They only call when they need something. They hang up on their parents if they don't get their own way. Sometimes they resort to calling their parent by their first name to show dishonor and disrespect. It's crazy. I also know families where the parents have felt so guilty about what has happened in this family, or the divorce that's happened, or how the parent handled the divorce, that they go overboard to accommodate their adult children and to try and somehow make up for this lack that they feel responsible for in their adult children's lives. I find myself in conversations with some of these friends and saying things like, if you've asked for forgiveness If you've gone before the Lord and asked for forgiveness, then you have to release your adult children to work out their own feelings, their own issues with the Lord or a counselor themselves. It's very important for us to have healthy boundaries and healthy relationships. When we have been a victim of abuse, whether it's a betrayal by a spouse who's committed adultery, by a spouse who has an addiction, by a spouse who is verbally or emotionally abusive, or by a spouse who's physically abusive, it's important, once we have gone through the healing process, to maintain our healing by setting healthy boundaries. So I want to encourage all of us today to create healthy boundaries and keep them. I want us to embrace the idea that a healthy boundary is nothing to feel guilty about. It is right, it is proper. Even Jesus knew when to step away from the crowds and get some time to himself. Even Jesus knew when it was time to be just with his disciples or to be with his disciples plus a huge crowd. I think that's an example of healthy boundaries. So I hope today you will think about how, or if rather, you have any places where you allow yourself, because of guilt and manipulation, to do things that inside your heart you feel like, it's just not right for the moment. But I also encourage you that if you need to go back to someone, especially your children, and say, please forgive me, I own this, to do so. After you've done so, just like God has forgiven our sins and cast them as far as the east is from the west, remembering them no more, I encourage you not to beat yourself up, but to remember these things no more and just pray for those you love to walk in love. Have a great rest of the day and a wonderful week.